Hello, sweetheart. It's so wonderful to hear your voice again. I have to admit, tracking down a new number for you wasn't easy at all, Julia spoke softly, attempting to suppress her excitement, though fear and sadness weighed on her tone. How have things been on your end? Emily paused, considering her response before choosing to stay cautious. New phone, who's this? She replied flatly. For goodness sake, Emily, it's me, your mother, Julia said, a hint of frustration edging into her voice. I'm sorry it's been so long, but I thought you'd at least recognize your own mother's voice after all this time. Emily gave a faint smile. She knew her mother's voice immediately, but decided to proceed with caution, given the circumstances. This guarded approach allowed her to acknowledge her mother's absence without coming across as rude. Oh, hi, Mom, she responded carefully. You caught me off guard. I just wanted to be careful. These days, I can't be too trusting with strange calls, Emily said, pausing to gather her thoughts as she braced herself to address her mother's claims of care and affection over the years. Without dropping her composure, Emily made it clear she wasn't willing to let Julia off the hook that easily. Mom, I don't think you can really say the last 3 years have been filled with your love or support. You left when I was almost 14, and this is the first call I've had from you since. I'm 17 now, and it's been a long time without any motherly love from you. Julia sighed deeply. I'm so sorry, Emily. Things were incredibly hard back then, and I felt I had no choice but to leave. But I didn't call to rehash all that. I wanted to check on you, and maybe talk to your siblings if they're around. Life is more stable now, and I'd really like to be part of yours again. I hope we can reconnect, sweetheart. I'd love for you to experience the benefits of having a mother with some wealth now, she continued. Frank and I are married, and I can finally do things for you, Sophie, and Ethan that I couldn't before. Believe me, life with Frank is so much better than it ever was with your father. Don't misunderstand, darling. Your dad's a decent man, but he just couldn't give us the kind of life Frank can now. Frank spoils me every day, and I just adore it. Julia's voice brightened with enthusiasm. Now, I want to show you all what life is really about, the way it should be. I want to make up for those difficult years when we had to scrape by because of your father's small salary. Hopefully, this will ease the guilt I feel for leaving you so suddenly. Emily could barely contain her simmering anger at this point. Her love for her father, Paul Haynes, ran deep. She admired how he'd shouldered all the responsibilities after Julia left, managing life as a single parent, raising 2 daughters, one in the thick of teenage years and the other only 10, while also dealing with a rowdy 20-year-old son. Emily was incredibly proud of her father's resilience and the way he rebuilt their lives following her mother's departure. Before she left, Julia had drained the family's bank accounts, plunging them into a financial crisis Emily could hardly believe at the time. At just 14, she took on the role of a homemaker, helping her family survive through sheer determination. United, her father and siblings pushed through that grueling 8-month period until life finally became more manageable, thanks to her father's hard work and sacrifices. Now, their life was as good as it could be, and Emily found it easy to place blame where it belonged, squarely on her mother. Her anger, fierce even at 14, was ready to lash out, but then she felt a sudden wave of calm clarity. She realized how to handle this conversation with her mother and what she needed to say, and it felt perfect. If she'd lashed out at Julia then and there, her mother would likely have hung up, and the connection between them might never have been restored. That wouldn't serve anyone, and Emily truly wanted to salvage some kind of relationship with her mother, despite her many mistakes. Embracing this newfound calm, Emily knew the best approach. She would express her feelings honestly, acknowledging her mother's failings while still leaving the door open for a relationship between Julia and her children. Yes, it was the right choice. A broad smile broke across Emily's face, and she eagerly decided to share a part of her life with her mother. She mentioned that she dressed up and looked quite nice, even offering to send a photo, urging Julia not to hang up. Standing in front of the mirror on her closet door with the late afternoon sunlight streaming in, Emily admired her reflection. She smiled brightly, showing off her wheat blonde hair pinned up in a sophisticated style and her elegant, lavender evening gown that fit her figure beautifully. Long, white gloves extended past her elbows, a final touch that completed her look, symbolizing her transformation from an awkward girl into a graceful young woman. She snapped a few pictures, chose the best one, and sent it to her mother's phone. Eagerly, she asked if Julia received it and waited for her response. After a long silence, Julia finally replied, marveling at how beautiful her daughter had grown. Her words faltered as she struggled to convey her emotions, her voice thick with tears and a lump in her throat. Julia then expressed just how much she had missed Emily, admitting how her daughter's maturity made her question her own past decisions. Despite Julia's rambling, Emily didn't pause. She mentioned that Sophie looked incredible too and headed over to her younger sister's room, where she found Sophie applying the final touches to her thick, honey-brown hair. Sophie's hair was styled in a graceful updo that framed her face, with soft curls cascading down. Her striking blue-gray eyes and gentle features drew admiration from everyone around her. With a slightly upturned nose and dimpled smile, Sophie's face radiated a natural beauty. Like Emily, she was dressed in a formal evening gown, exuding a delicate elegance, though with a subtler style than her older sisters. "Hey, Ratch, come on, pose for a picture. Mom's on the line, and I'll send it to her," Emily said, moving around Sophie to capture her best angle. Helping Sophie was Janice, a poised woman around 35, wearing an evening gown that exuded a regal charm, one that turned heads with ease. Janice noticed Emily aiming the smartphone at her and tried to step out of the shot, but Emily waved her back into place. "No, Janice, stay in the frame. I want you in this picture too," she insisted. Sophie, initially taken aback, rolled her eyes and, with a playful grin, cupped her hands around her mouth and called toward the phone, "Hello, ma'am. Can't chat now, but let's catch up later." Emily circled the room, snapping several shots of Sophie and Janice before nodding in satisfaction. "All set, ladies. I'll pick the best one and send it." She then raised the phone to her ear and said with a laugh, "Mom, I bet you'd barely recognize Sophie now. She's all grown up, and yes, she's even got curves." Sophie blushed, muttering, "Emily, you're such a dork," but couldn't help smiling as the others giggled at her reaction. Emily refocused on the phone, saying, "So, what do you think, Mom?" Julia seemed at a loss for words, stunned. "My goodness, I'm speechless, honey. You both look so elegant and grown up. I'm unbelievably proud of you and Sophie. Oh, how I wish I could be there with you." She kept pulling the phone away to gaze at the photos of her daughters, the weight of missing them pressing heavily on her heart. She wiped at her eyes, trying to absorb every detail of their images. "But Emily, why are you both dressed up like that? Don't tell me you're both going to prom?" she asked, clearly puzzled. Emily smiled, pleased that she'd piqued her mother's interest and was ready to reveal more. "No, Mom, it's even better than prom. Do you remember that grand annual gala you were always talking about? The one you dreamed of attending but never got an invitation to? The big summer soiree hosted by Sedgwick and Whitman?" Julia's memory clicked, and her tone became wistful. "Oh, of course. That event was the social highlight of the year. I would have given anything to attend, to be there in a stunning gown, mingling with the most glamorous and influential people around." She sighed dreamily before quickly coming back to reality. "Wait, did you and Sophie get jobs as hostesses, or maybe as waitstaff for that party? Wow, I'm so proud of you both. Imagine, my daughter's working at such a high-profile event," she exclaimed, thrilled by the thought. "No, Mom," Emily replied, barely able to contain her pride. "Sophie and I aren't working there. We're actually invited guests." She relished the surprise in her mother's silence. "And not just that, we'll be seated at the main table because Dad is the guest of honor. It's a surprise for him, but the organizers plan to recognize him with a special acknowledgement." Emily's voice bubbled with excitement. "Isn't that amazing? I'm even going to be part of the ceremony. Mom, I'm so nervous, but I can't wait." Julia sounded completely floored. "What? You're kidding, right? Emily, please tell me you're joking. Why on earth would they invite a cost control clerk as the guest of honor at an event like that? Be honest, honey. This isn't real, is it?" With a chuckle, Emily replied, "Oh, of course, Mom. Sophie and I dress like this every day, just sitting around waiting for you to call so we can tease you. Let's get real, Mom. Life has changed a lot since you left. She took a steadying breath, her anger tempered as she prepared to share their story. We went through a lot of pain, more than you realize. No, we were all completely shattered. But Dad somehow managed to keep us all together, even Ethan, and he rebuilt our lives from scratch. Maybe it's time I fill you in on everything that's happened since you left. Sound good? Emily glanced at her watch. Actually, we'll have to hurry. The limo with Fiona and Ethan should be back in about 15 minutes, and then we'll need to head out. She took a deep breath, calming herself before beginning to recount their story. Mom, Dad was completely crushed when he found out about you and some older guy in his bed. You disappeared right after he confronted you about it, but honestly, I think you were planning to leave either way. You just sped up the timeline. Julia cut in, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't know you were aware of what happened between your dad and me. But yes, after he found out, I felt I had to leave. There was no point in staying. He even had photos of us. She sighed. Frank and I decided to leave the city and move into his apartment in Manhattan, and that's where we've been ever since. I'm sorry your dad brought you into this whole mess. It wasn't fair to you. Mom. Emily couldn't hold back, her frustration flaring as she stomped her foot. This is just ridiculous. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, then continued. Dad didn't tell us anything. I'm the one who told him. Do you even know who took those pictures? Yeah, that's right, it was me, Mom. That day, Sophie and I came home, and the house was unusually quiet except for some strange noises from your room. I told Sophie to wait downstairs while I went to check things out. When I saw what was happening, I took the pictures and sent them to Dad myself. Then Sophie and I left to hang out with friends. By the time we got back that evening, you were crying alone in your room. And the next morning, you were gone. Emily's voice turned bitter. So, the last memory I have of my caring mother is of her tangled up with some creepy old guy in Dad's room. Seriously, Mom, you don't think I needed therapy to erase those images from my mind? Thank goodness you at least had the decency to cover up. Otherwise, I'd probably still be in counseling. Julia gasped. Emily, how could you betray me like that? Betray you? Emily's voice was icy. I don't think we're in any position to trade accusations about betrayal, Mom. That wouldn't be a fair fight, don't you think? I could open up a floodgate if I wanted to. And believe me, Ratch and Ethan might have a few things to say, too. So, are you ready to talk about the past 3 years, or what? As Emily continued speaking with her mother, she was surprised at her own composure. She realized just how much she'd grown and matured over the years, even under the weight of their family's troubles. On the other end of the line, Julia was beginning to understand that, if she wanted any chance at rebuilding a relationship with her children, she'd have to face the truth of her choices and accept their consequences. A few gifts and occasional calls wouldn't patch up the damage. Something deeper, more meaningful was needed. Her children had come to terms with living without her, and to understand their lives, she'd have to listen to their perspective on her choices. She couldn't escape it now. If she backed out, she might lose them for good. But if she intended to repair the relationship, she'd have to let their feelings flood over her, no matter how painful. After a long pause, Julia steadied herself. Her voice softened, carrying a note of regret. You're absolutely right, Emily. One day, we'll have to sit down and go through all of this. But for now, let's focus on rebuilding some sort of connection. Reaching out to you and your siblings is a good start, don't you think? So, tell me how things have been for you all. Emily couldn't wait to update her mother on everything their family had gone through in her absence. Her words came out with excited energy. Mom, you won't believe what's happened. It's like something out of a novel, or maybe a fairy tale. She continued, after you left, Dad hit a really low point for a while. It was rough. Most days, when Sophie and I got home from school, I'd have her wait outside while I went in to check on him, just in case. Every time the phone rang, my heart would race, thinking it might be the police, a hospital, or worse. I even had to tell Ethan to get it together and stop partying so much. I couldn't be the only one keeping us all afloat. He tried to step up, but he struggled to be a real support. Eventually, though, Dad started reading books on heartbreak, grief, and resilience. Most nights, he'd lock himself in his room, and Sophie and I would hear him typing away on his computer. I think writing down his thoughts and emotions helped him process everything. Oh, and Mom, remember how much Dad struggled with his weight? He started getting up early to run and even dusted off the treadmill and weights. Now he exercises all the time. It's like he pushed himself to start living again, and it was so inspiring to watch. Emily paused, sensing her mother's discomfort. I'm guessing you probably don't want to hear all this about Dad, but it's really important to explain how our lives have changed since you left. So, sorry if this isn't what you wanted to hear, but, for the record, Dad's actually looking pretty great these days. Julia, on the other end, managed a faint laugh. No, it's okay, honey. I needed to hear this. Thank you for telling me everything. I really do want to know how things are going for you, Sophie and Ethan. Well, as for Sophie, it's simple. After everything that happened, Sophie seemed to shut down, retreating into a shell and staying distant for a long time. But now, she's almost back to her old self, and you wouldn't believe how well she's doing. A lot of it is thanks to Janice. She and Sophie have really become close friends. Julia looked at the photo on her phone again, zooming in to get a better look at the woman helping Sophie with her dress. So, who is this Janice you're talking about? Oh, right, sorry, Mom. Janice is Dad's girlfriend. Isn't she stunning? And she's incredibly sweet. She used to be a swimsuit model, and though she still works in the industry, she's mostly in fashion modeling now. She's been amazing for Sophie, really helping her come out of her shell and encouraging her to explore a modeling career. Emily's eyes lit up as she remembered something. Oh, and Mom, you have to pick up last month's Teen Fashion World magazine. Sophie's on the cover. She looks incredible. Lately, she's becoming a popular model, with lots of people recognizing her. What? Julia practically choked, a mix of shock and anger flooding her voice. First, your father hooks up with a woman half his age, and now she's parading your little sister around for these sleazy photographers? If I knew what she was doing with Sophie in those cheesecake shots, I'd press charges against both your father and this Janet, whatever her name is. Emily held back, waiting for her mother's outburst to settle, then responded in a calm, measured tone. Mom, you need to understand that Dad and Janice are incredibly careful. They manage all of Sophie's and my modeling work very closely. One of them is always with us at every shoot, and they make sure every photographer signs a strict contract. Nothing is allowed without Dad's direct approval. He doesn't even let Sophie wear swimsuits on shoots. And Janice, as I said, is her name. She's 34, only an 11-year age gap with Dad. A much smaller gap than you have with Frank. Speaking of which, how old is he now? 100. Emily couldn't help but add, barely containing her sarcasm. Anyway, I don't know if Dad and Janice will ever get married, but they seem to be genuinely happy together. I've never seen Dad so content. Frank is only 66, Emily, Julia shot back, her irritation evident. Not as ancient as you're implying. But honestly, I'm not sure modeling is the best path for Sophie. I think she'd be better off focusing on something more substantial. Emily bit her lip, holding back her frustration, then took a deep breath to regain her composure. Mom, Sophie's modeling career has been one of the best things for her. She's so much more confident and self-assured now. She's finally found something she's passionate about and is really starting to believe in herself. She even takes charge in the studio sometimes, suggesting creative themes and poses for her shoots. She paused, then added, Mom, let's be realistic. Sophie never felt she was good at school and saw herself as a failure. But now, she's on her way to becoming a top fashion model before she's even finished high school. Her bank account alone would probably impress even you. And yes, I'm modeling too, though it's not my main interest. We do a lot of fashion shows together, with me mainly supporting her, showing off different looks to complement Sophie's outfits. But the best part is that Sophie and I have gotten so close. We help each other, collaborate, and it's really brought us together. Plus, I'm making enough money to save up for college. I still enjoy school and keep up my grades. I'm even taking extra classes to graduate early for college. I still have an A average, though chemistry is a bit of a challenge this year. It's tough, but I need to ace it for veterinary school. Suddenly, Emily's face lit up, and she giggled. "Oh, Mom, you won't believe this. Sophie and I get to keep a lot of the clothes from our shows and shoots. I have this amazing wardrobe now. Can you imagine? I'm one of the most stylish girls in school now, not the geeky one in the background. A lot of the girls who used to act like they were too cool now ask me for fashion tips, and some even want my autograph. It's funny, and kind of gross at the same time. So, yeah, Mom, I'm almost popular. And the best part? Guys are starting to notice me." She laughed, clearly enjoying this turn of events. Julia felt a pang of discomfort. Recognition and success were things she chased after, leaving her family behind in the process. And yet, it seemed that her children had found their own success without her, achieving things she had struggled for. What made it sting even more was that they seemed to have done it effortlessly, while she had sacrificed everything for it. Julia sighed heavily. "Sweetheart, I'm glad to hear you and Sophie are doing so well, though I'm almost afraid to ask, how's Ethan doing? Is he all right?" Emily glanced at the clock, knowing Ethan and Fauna would be back soon. She didn't want to rush her brother's story, but she felt ready to give her mom an update. Taking a steadying breath, she continued, "Mom, you might be surprised, but Ethan has turned things around. I mean, he was always kind of wild, even before you left. After you left, Ethan went off the rails even more, partying, drinking, and completely losing control for a while. Eventually, Dad got fed up and told him he had to either get a job or go back to school. But instead of listening, Ethan just blew up at him. So, finally, Dad had no choice but to kick him out, telling him not to come back until he'd straightened himself out. Dad even had to call the cops a couple of times just to keep him from coming home." Julia was incredulous. "What? That idiot threw my son out? How dare he? I'll get Frank to call a lawyer and sue that monster," she raged, clutching her phone, fuming. "Good luck with that, Mom," Emily replied, a hint of irony in her voice. She knew all too well that her mother had always let Ethan get away with anything and everything, backing up his reckless behavior by slipping him money whenever he asked. Ethan was honestly lucky he hadn't ended up in serious trouble. Besides, all of this happened a year and a half ago. Since then, Ethan and Dad have patched things up. Emily continued. Ethan relied on friends to keep him afloat for a while, but even they got tired of his freeloading and kicked him out. He spent some time on the streets before realizing he didn't want to keep living like that, especially when he saw how well the rest of us were doing. Eventually, he came to Dad, apologized, and asked to come home. But Dad held firm and told him he had to get a job first. So, Ethan started working for a roofing crew, and after that, Dad let him move back. Of course, Dad also made sure he paid part of the bills to learn some responsibility. Emily chuckled, remembering Ethan's complaints. It was pretty funny hearing him grumble about his tough job and the costs he had to cover. But Dad always told him, "That's real life, kid, so you'd better get used to it." That was life until Fauna came along. "Oh no, don't tell me your father has another girlfriend," Julia spat. "Who's this Fauna?" Emily burst out laughing. "No, Mom. Fauna is Dad's personal assistant. She's sharp-tongued, takes zero nonsense, and we all adore her. Dad even calls her his cool boss. She's only 22 but incredibly smart and capable." They met at a conference in Minneapolis, where she walked right up to him, shook his hand, and basically said, "You need me to organize your travel, book your flights, and manage your expenses if you want any real success." Dad was so impressed he hired her on the spot. Now she lives with us, and Dad jokes about having his own harem. It's hilarious. Fona's been instrumental in helping Dad grow his business. She's like an older sister to me and Sophie. And get this, Mom, she's from Norway. She's about 5'7", with a chic haircut, short blonde hair, and the most piercing light blue eyes. Poor Ethan was smitten from the moment he met her, but she made it crystal clear she wasn't interested in dating a guy who had no direction. And wouldn't you know it? That lit a fire under him. Emily's tone turned more serious as she continued, "And now for the big news. Brace yourself, Mom. 4 months ago, Ethan enlisted in the Air Force. Soon he'll be off to language school in Monterey, California." Julia's shock was palpable. "What? Language school? What language?" "Russian," Emily replied, chuckling at her mother's stunned silence. Isn't it wild? Right now, Ethan is stationed at Lackland Air Force Base, waiting for his security clearance. Dad invited him home for a party we're throwing in his honor. Oh, and by the way, she added with a grin, Fona started warming up to him, though she still won't admit she's into him. But we can all tell she's falling for him, too. She isn't seeing anyone else, and they talk on the phone every chance they get. Ethan is completely head over heels. And believe it or not, Mom, Ethan has serious plans now. He wants to finish language school, go to college, get a degree, and eventually become an officer. Can you believe it? The same wild Ethan, actually aiming to be a military officer. Love does strange things, doesn't it? Emily smiled, twirling her stiletto heel as they talked about her brother's future. Suddenly, she heard a baritone voice singing The Impossible Dream echoing down the hall. Laughing, Emily jumped off her bed and dashed out. Mom, you have to hear this, she exclaimed, holding the phone toward the booming voice. In the background, other female voices joined in with playful howls and giggles, followed by Sophie's laughter. Dad's singing my favorite song. Janice chimed in, chuckling. Don't quit your day job. Emily teased. Come on, Dad. Why don't you take that act on the road? The bus leaves in 10 minutes. Paul's voice, full of mock offense, cut through the girls' laughter. Oh, no respect in my own house. You're all off my Christmas list. Another burst of laughter erupted, followed by a chorus of, We love you, Daddy, and Paul's laughing reassurance. All right, you're all back on the list, he declared. Emily returned to the phone, still giggling. Dad's a riot. He sings whenever he's happy or nervous, and we always egg him on. It's kind of our thing. Julia remained silent, unsure how to respond. Part of her had hoped they'd be struggling without her, maybe even missing her. But seeing how well they were doing, how happy and close they all seemed, left her speechless, feeling strangely adrift. Emily, sensing her mother's silence, picked up the conversation again. Dad has no idea he's the guest of honor tonight, but he's already feeling a bit nervous. He's actually playing a couple of guitar duets with the band alongside Sam Whitman. You remember how Dad is with his blues guitar, right? Since he and Sam became friends, they've been getting together almost weekly, jamming, sharing some beers, and just playing for fun. You should hear their jokes about becoming rock stars any day now. It's hilarious. They're actually pretty good, though, and tonight will be their first time playing in front of an audience. Just picture Dad in a tuxedo, rocking out on stage. Emily grinned, imagining her father up there. Julia was stunned. Emily, are you telling me that your dad and John Whitman are friends? The John Whitman? How did that even happen? Emily felt a flicker of mischief, knowing her mother's admiration for the Whitman family's wealth and influence, and her long-time dream of meeting them in person. Now, not only had her dad met Sam Whitman, but they'd practically become best friends. She also knew her mom would be even more surprised to learn that the famously formal Whitman family insisted the Haynes call him simply Sam. In fact, Sam had been instrumental in helping her dad's writing career get off the ground. Yes, Mom, the same John. Well, Sam, as he prefers. It all started when Dad wrote a few articles about surviving and rebuilding life after losing everything to, well, an unfaithful spouse who ran off with someone else. When a couple of small magazines picked up his articles, Dad was thrilled. I think that's when Sam read one of Dad's pieces and reached out, asking him to give a motivational talk at a Whitman Corporation employee meeting. Dad nearly had a heart attack when he got the offer. He prepared a speech based on his articles, delivered it at the event, and it was a hit. People loved it, and Sam then asked him to speak at their annual shareholders meeting. The response was incredible, and soon after, Dad started getting invitations from other companies. One opportunity led to another, and before long, Dad was writing regularly for bigger magazines and eventually quit his old job to focus on writing and speaking. Sam kept introducing him to people, and soon they discovered they both had a passion for blues and rock guitar. Their shared love of music brought them even closer, and they've been friends ever since. Emily paused, letting her mother absorb everything she'd just shared. Their lives had indeed taken an unexpected turn. Wait, you're telling me your father, is a writer now? Like, a real, published writer? Julia was baffled, struggling to accept the thought of her formerly underachieving ex-husband suddenly finding success. She secretly hoped his new career wasn't paying him too handsomely. Emily noticed the sounds of activity drifting up from the first floor. Guests had started arriving, and muffled laughter and voices filled the house. A deep male voice and a soft female voice stood out, hinting that the party was getting underway. She saw Janice leaving Sophie's room to head downstairs, likely preparing to greet everyone as the hostess. Suddenly, Emily remembered her own duties for the night. "Mom, I'll need to go soon. Sam and Nina Whitman have arrived, along with photographers from the newspaper's society column and those creating the annual album they sell. Every year, there's this elaborate photo spread capturing all the enchanting moments from the gala. Honestly, I find the whole thing a bit nauseatingly grandiose, but the sales do raise money for charity, so it's all for a good cause, I suppose." And the guests eat it up, basking in the spotlight, almost like they're stars. Emily's voice held a touch of sarcasm. She found the event excessively pretentious, as though it catered to the egos of its elite guests. Still, she couldn't deny a bit of pride that her father's accomplishments had elevated their family to this level of respect, even from her estranged mother. Julia was quick to defend the tradition. "Oh, Emily, don't be so dismissive. It's a true honor to be featured in that album and to know you're part of something historic. You and Sophie should be thrilled to attend such a grand gathering as honored guests. And seated at the main table, no less, your photos will be on nearly every page. Every year, I've secretly ordered one of those albums, and this time, I'll finally be able to point to Ethan, you, and Sophie and say, 'Look at these incredible people. They're my children.' I'll probably be a little envious, but I couldn't be prouder. I'm definitely ordering extra copies as soon as they're out." "Okay, Mom," Emily replied absent-mindedly, then remembered something else. "Oh, and there's another bit of news. Dad has an event in New York over Labor Day weekend, a writers' conference, and Sophie, Janice, Fona, and I are all planning to go along with him. Maybe we could arrange to see you then?" "I'd really like that, Mom. I'm sure I could talk Sophie into it too, though she's still pretty upset with you for leaving. Maybe we'll bring Janice along, so you can meet her. And, who knows, you might even want to see Dad while we're there," Emily added lightly. "Oh, sweetheart, that's a wonderful idea," Julia replied eagerly. "Let's work out the details. I'm really looking forward to seeing you and Sophie. As for your dad and his girlfriend, well, I'm not sure that's wise. There's just too much water under that bridge. But I'd love for you to meet Frank. After all, he's your stepfather now." Emily made a dramatic, gagging face, pretending to be revolted. "Yeah, no thanks, Mom. I still have nightmares of you, and your Frankie getting cozy. So, the only way I'll agree to meet him is if Dad and Janice come too. Seems only fair." Julia bristled but forced herself to stay calm. "All right, Emily, we'll see how things go. Let's keep our eyes on the goal here, to finally reunite. I can't wait to hug you and Sophie again. Let's focus on that, sweetheart." Then, as if eager to distract from the tension, she added, "And by the way, the New York Literary Guild is hosting a Meet the Authors event over Labor Day weekend, and Frank is using his connections to get us tickets. I'll try to arrange tickets for all of us to attend." Julia's excitement was unmistakable. "It's going to be quite the prestigious gathering, Emily. Just imagine. Famous writers everywhere, signing their books and meeting fans. You might even snap a selfie with one of them. Frank's over the moon about it." "Oh, and did you know Michael Scott is going to be there? He's an up-and-coming author, and Frank's totally obsessed with his debut novel. He says it's absolutely brilliant." "Yes, Mom, I've heard of Michael Scott," Emily replied, barely concealing her amusement. "Actually, I've met him a few times, and I agree. His work is amazing. I read his book not too long ago, and it's, well, pretty thought-provoking. Have you read it?" Julia hesitated, caught off guard by her daughter's question. "Well, no, not yet. It's not exactly my type of book. But Frank? Oh, he's a huge fan." Emily stifled a laugh, holding back a comment about how her mom preferred books with lots of pictures. "Mom, do you have a hardcover or paperback copy of Michael's book?" Julia looked around, heading into Frank's office. "Yes, we've got a hardcover copy right here on Frank's desk. Why do you ask, dear? Take a look at the back inside flap of the dust jacket and tell me what you see. Julia flipped the cover open and glanced at the photo. Her eyes widened. Oh, dear God. It's Paul. This is a picture of your father, one I took about 7 or 8 years ago. Emily, this can't be. Is Michael Scott really? Emily was doubled over with laughter, barely able to speak. Yep, Mom. Michael Scott is actually Paul J. Haynes. When Dad started writing, he wanted to keep his work separate from his personal life, so he published under a pseudonym. It's pretty hilarious, don't you think? Wiping away tears of laughter, Emily continued, Just imagine, Mom. Your new husband's favorite author is actually your ex-husband. It's just too funny. Honestly, they could make a movie out of this. Julia sat in stunned silence, her face a mix of disbelief and devastation. Finally, she managed a faint, crap. Emily checked the time and realized she had to go. Still chuckling, she said, I have to go, Mom. I'll email you, and you can send me yours. We'll finalize our plans for Labor Day weekend. I'm glad you called, and I really do want to see you again. I love you, Mom. And seriously, this is still too funny. In a barely audible, defeated voice, Julia replied, Tell your brother and sister I said hi and give them my number. I'd love to hear from them whenever they get a chance. I love you too, Emily. Emily ended the call, still laughing to herself at the sheer irony of it all. She adjusted her outfit in the large mirror, preparing herself for the social event of the night. She knew she'd have no trouble keeping a dazzling smile on her face, and only she knew the true reason for her excellent mood. Meanwhile, Julia sat motionless, staring blankly at the book on the desk. As the truth settled over her, she came to a cold realization. Karma can be merciless. She was still reeling from her conversation with Emily when Frank practically bounced into the room, his excitement obvious. Julia, you'll never believe what just happened. I got a handwritten card from Michael Scott. I wrote him a fan letter, and he actually responded. Can you imagine? Frank beamed, holding up the card. Here, let me read it to you. Julia watched in horrified silence as he read aloud. Dear Frank, I can't tell you how much it means to me that you enjoyed my first novel. What you may not realize is that you've had an incredibly positive influence on my life and career. I can't wait to meet you in person and thank you properly. Best wishes, Michael Scott. Frank's joy was contagious as he continued. Isn't this amazing? He sounds familiar, actually. I think I may have met him somewhere, but I just can't place it. I really hope I can get to know him better when we meet. As Frank gushed on, Julia felt her heart sink further. She sat there, her expression darkening with every word he spoke. Finally, barely able to contain her frustration, she muttered, Frank, please, just shut up.